A lot of folks here have had a chance to check out your book, or we just know about you because we know our Beatle history here. This is Beatle University. But by way of introduction, if you could, and if we could please, 1 second here, we'll get, hello? Hello? Thank you, that was very good. See, I went to school with nuns and they'd scream, shut up! You know, I've learned over the years it's just best to use a little peace. But now that we have your undivided attention, Mr. Dennis O'Dell, our very special guest, we're happy to have here tonight. How on earth did you connect with these four guys? How did that come about?
Well, you know, I've actually come to the conclusion, Terry, that this academy, as you call it, know more about it than I do. And I was with them for 6 years. How did it come about? Well, what happened was that there was this group of people which was unknown to me, absolutely unknown. And I had just returned from, which was then Yugoslavia, making a Viking picture after a year. And I got a call from United Artists to ask me if I would do this pop picture cheaply, very quickly. Don't spend any money. These guys won't last. so I said it just wasn't my style of picture making and passed on it. But my kids were staying with me and they said, "You must be stark raving mad." So I called back and I said I'd do it for a period of time. Well, the period of time was to be 6 weeks and it lasted 6 years. Which was great. So that was the first time I met them. But they were virtually unknown then. And then, you know the history. They went to the States and had that wonderful concert in Paris. And when they came back to me, they were virtually stars. You know, when they came back to make the movie Hard Day's Night. And that was the first time I met them on the train. I'd spoken to them several times about costumes and how we make pictures and try to educate them into the way of making a movie. But the first time I actually was able to sit down with them and talk with them was on the train, which was a very exciting time, I must say. What with George ogling his new wife, or wife-to-be, and you know, Patty Boyd, who was dressed up as a schoolgirl on the thing. Yeah, it was great, it was great.
What was your first impression of these four cheeky guys?
Well, by that time, I had heard a bit of their music, and which was rather special. And to come to do a film from nowhere, no experience of filmmaking, and coming on, my first impression, to talk to one of them was like talking to four of them. You know, they all paid attention to each other's attitude to filmmaking. And there were very small ground rules, like, you know, continuity and making sure they wore the right clothes for the right scene and stuff like that. They were absolutely disciplined to it, and it was amazing to me how they made the transference from the stage performances to the screen. It was quite amazing. They were keen to do it. And that was the wonderful time of their lives, really. You know, they were so up on everything and were writing such great stuff. So it was a great experience.
Well, Larry Kane is one of our guests this weekend, and he was with the Beatles the first time they saw Hard Day's Night and said that they were very embarrassed and just in agony because seeing themselves on screen was painful. And any of you here, if you've seen yourself on video or something, you know. But in the process while they were making it, how they seem so comfortable and so natural in front of the camera.
Well, yes, it's true. It's really a nerve-wracking experience to be put in front of a movie camera for anybody, you know, unless one's experienced and working to that idea. Really and truly, what happened was that because of the way we laid out the film, and the wonderful script by Alan Owen, you know, which we used only as a guide, really, to enable the Beatles to do their own freedom. Now, what happened was, in trying to put around them the sort of locations and the way we filmed it, gave them immense freedom. I mean, because we had tried to do it in a cinema verite way, you know, which was let the actors perform and worry about the camera stuff after. And it absolutely fell into this extraordinary genre of filmmaking with these guys, you know. So it was, from that point of view, from the, well, what happened was, when I first read the script, the train sequence was to be, it was written in the script, it was to be what we call a rear projection screen, which is an enormous screen they put up, project the moving countryside or whatever, and stand the actors in front of it and photograph them. Well, it's so limited, you know, it was so, I said to Richard Lester, who was the director of the film, the first time I met him, I said, you know, we cannot do this. We cannot, we must, would you believe it if I got a real train, we could shoot the whole thing on a train? He said, my God, I never thought I'd heard anybody speak like that. So I did that, I got the train, and it laid out the whole performance style of the Beatles, because they were never restricted in anything we shot. The locations we chose, the interior sets which we had to build in some cases to run away from the crowds that were, you know, fans that were we put a camera down outside at 4 o'clock when the schools were out. There were 15,000 young kids there, you know, which was enormous. But yeah, it was an exciting experience.
Well, when they finished A Hard Day's Night, did you have any idea that you'd continue to work with them, and how did that come about?
I was a busy producer at that time, making films, feature films. And yes, I knew that they had a 3-period contract, you know, to make films for the United Artists Film Distributors. But the difficulty of it was ever getting a subject, again, like Hard Day's Night. It's a very difficult act to follow. So I went off and made other films. For example, when they made Help, I was producing a film called Bedford Incident with Richard Widmark, Sidney Poitier. They asked me to do it, but it wasn't Hard Day's Night, you know, and the script wasn't Hard Day's Night. And I talked to John about it long later, and he said, Dennis, I don't remember a day of it. We were stoned the whole picture. They never remembered a day of it. So, yeah. And then, from time to time, I used to spend a bit of leisure time with them. And we just went our ways. You know, they did what they had to do, and I went off and made more movies, until I got this call. After Brian Epstein died, and I was having lunch with Dick Lester at a studio in Isleworth in London, and there was a call for me. I wasn't aware that anybody knew where I was for that afternoon. And it was John and Paul, and they said, will you come and run us? So I said, my God, you know, could you come and talk to us about it and do it for... So, of course, the rest is history. I was there for, you know, the whole period then. So really, I was in at the beginning and sadly at the end, although it came to a natural conclusion, really. Right.
And you have a book now with your memoirs and your stories with the Beatles? Yes.
Yeah. I did it because I read so many books that weren't actually true. You know, there was a lot of strange stuff written about them. And I wanted to put one or two things like, for example, George, who was the most difficult one. Well, let me just say this. They had an agreement between themselves that if one did not agree with what they had in mind to do, then the others wouldn't do it. So for example, I'd suggested and set up several films for them. Walter Shenson had done so, Richard Lester had done so, and none of them were, it was possible to agree on that. So that was a good thing, but generally it was hard to find a subject for them until I went to New York to renegotiate their contract, because, can I just tell you, I'll let you into a secret, for Hard Day's Night, the Beatles were paid between them £25,000. How much is that, Harry, in dollars? For the four of them?
No, about 17,000.
Well, when I went back to renegotiate their contract, I suggested $1 million each, which was about par for the course for them. But I had no subject. And I was going up to a meeting with United Artists to try to force up this contract arrangement that they had after Brian died. And the weakness of it was that I didn't have a subject. We had discussed, they had discussed maybe doing a remake of the Elvis pictures. I did point out there's only one of Elvis and 4 of them, which made it rather difficult. But going up in the elevator, I suddenly thought, yeah, the book I read years ago, Lord of the Rings. And I mean, when you think that was 3 years ago, I suddenly had this idea of them doing it and Donovan being in it, because that's how, you know, as well, and doing it with these 4 little small people in Middle Earth. Well, they made the picture 32 years later with different stars. But I thought it was a great idea to try and get them to do it. And I spoke to John about it, and John said, Dennis, he said, there's no question of doubt about it. I can write a double album for this. Immediately, you know, with music in his head already for it. Because the music for the first film, Hard Day's Night, United Artists, the distributor's share paid for the entire film before the film was shown to one person paying customer, paying customer. It was quite amazing performance, really. But they, you know, in my heart, I suppose you would never have gotten the Beatles to have hung in, you know, for the preparation period that one has on films and things like that. But generally, they were very receptive to the idea, and it was the only subject that they agreed to do ever after Hard Day's Night. But we never got around to doing it.
Okay. We can take some questions too for Dennis. If you'd like to ask a question, please come up here and line up, and we will turn the mic over to you. But the initial days of Apple Corps, like what was, you know, we've heard all about the idealism and the intentions and all that, and then we've heard about how it was just money was flowing out the door. I mean, what was it like from inside? We've read The Longest Cocktail Party and all that kind of stuff, but let's hear your side of that.
Chaos. The only word I can recall is chaos. You know, they were under the impression that they could open the whole system to people writing in and putting their suggestions for film. I never read so much rubbish in my life, and it never ever worked as an idea. It was chaotic, you know, and they had already opened that boutique, which was like, you know, a terrible disaster. So it was difficult. It was a difficult time. But like any company, when and by the way, they weren't that keen on working anymore. You know, they thought when they got the freedom of when Brian died, they felt they were free and could do nothing again. But it was chaotic. It was, as it happened, if you look back on it now, Apple is exactly the way we left it, or the people I took in there to do it, exactly. I mean, music, books, obviously recordings, and it's exactly the way it was left, including the anthology, because when I was there, I was appalled to find that all the clips and all the shows were all on videotape and everywhere. So I actually collected them, got them together, and transferred them to film and started a library of Beatles film, which became the anthology, in fact. So it was an interesting period. It would have taken time to settle down, and John met Yoko, that's history, you know, and Ringo went through his divorce, and you know, Maureen disappeared, and unfortunately Linda passed away. You know, it was sad, really, but they were exciting days.
Dennis, I just wondered, how did it feel to be immortalized in the Beatles song, You Know My Name, Look Up the Number? I know it's not going to be a long answer, but whatever you got.
Well, yeah, right. It sounds as though I'm dead to be immortalized. I can assure you, not just yet. Well, you know, but yeah, it didn't strike me till after, because well, let me tell you what happened. I had no idea they were doing this. You know, we did this. And I was filming a film with Peter Sellers, which Ringo came and did some work with, it was on as well. And I had a birthday party that Peter had put together during lunch hour at the studio, and Ringo was trying to play me something on a little decrepit tape recorder on the floor, which I couldn't hear for the noise. Never thought any more about it. Now I start getting calls from my wife from all over the place. I mean mysterious calls. Ah, I got your name. Now I've got your I thought the mafia's here. I thought they finally caught up with me with this. And it went on. And we changed the number about 3 times. She was out of her mind. And we were there a weekend. And I said, just let me answer all the calls. Now, I get a call from some guys and the same dialogue. You know his name. Now I've got your number. So, holy Christ, how do I get out of here? And I kept the person talking on the phone, and there was a group of them, which made it even worse, calling from a candle factory in Philadelphia. So I thought, and then I asked him about it. Then he said about the record. Now, I hadn't known it was existed at that point. And there were about 20 of them suddenly, 3 weeks later, appeared on my doorstep in London, expecting to come and live with me. And they were, it was in the middle of Flower Power, and they weren't exactly tidy-looking house guests. but it was absolutely amazing. Now, when I questioned Paul about it and John, Paul said, we've been doing this record for about 18 months, he said. And every time we get stuck with something in the studio in Abbey Road, back they go to, his name, Dennis Dell. And so he said, Paul told me, he said it's the happiest of all the records they made. And I think I'm right in saying it. It's the only record where they actually name anybody on the disc. They never did, I don't think, anything else. So I was flattered, not immortalized, but flattered.
Was that what Ringo was trying to play for you? That song on the tape, was that he was trying to play that for you?
I think I can't remember how that happened, but there was a strange band in England at the time called the something Doodah Band.
Bonzo Dog, yes,
remember
right.
that?
With Neil Innes.
And
yes.
they were there, and they did the nightclub thing, like,
right, right.
But I was flattered that they did it, I have to say.
Well, it made you world famous then.
Oh,
Did you have to get an unlisted number after that?
yeah, absolutely. But
Yes, Dennis. I actually have 3 questions. One is is concerning Apple. First of all, who owns Apple?
who owns it?
Who owns Apple Records
Now?
at the moment? Yes.
The executors of George, the executors of John, Yoko, and Paul, and Ringo.
I see. So the four Beatles estates.
It was always a private company. But there was one interesting thing about it was that when I was there, because I was responsible for photographing the logo, and protecting it. It was from John's idea from a Magritte painting and Paul. And when we had this, as in film, there were 2 reasons for it. I thought they were paying enormous income tax at that time, and I thought it would be rather a good idea to change the direction of their recording programs through Apple, through the new company, but thread it through several countries. In other words, hopefully to pick up royalties in each country, and then one controlled much more, what was profit and what was loss. Now, but to do that, I had to register and copyright the images, which I did in most countries in the world. Now, Neil Aspinall came out to one of my 70th birthday parties, and he said, "You know that copyright deal you did?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "It pays us £1 million a year." They eventually did a deal where they got a set sum of £25 million because the copyright had been violated. So it was an interesting time at Apple. it wasn't the loss that was been published ever around the world. It was certainly not that.
One more question.
Yeah.
I know that Apple produced the Plastic Ono Band with John Lennon and also Badfinger. What other groups did they produce? Apple.
Well, it didn't really get off the ground, you know. What happened was with the other groups, it was one of the reasons why I copyrighted the thing. I was hoping that we could bring in more, you know, Italian, Spanish, and different groups from America. But it didn't really get off the ground of that, although they had Jackie Lomax, you know, George's favorite group. He brought them into Apple, which was great. We tried to get Harry Nilsson, who was always in the building. As a young man, he was always up there in the building. And the other group that Mal Evans had got, do you remember Big Mal, the lovely Big Mal? Lovely man. And yeah, I love Mal. And he had this group called the Ivies. Now, when I produced Magic Christian, he came to me and said, well, could I use them, could I help to get them on the road? They were recording for Apple by maybe using them in the film. And I said, well, I would use them under two circumstances. One is that you allow me to change their name from the Ivies, which it didn't fit that sort of film I was making. And the other one, if you get Paul to produce the music. Well, we got Paul to produce the music. And the change of the name came. And strange enough, it had been talked about earlier on without my knowledge. But that morning, I had a meeting with Paul, and I was late. And I came in and I said, Paul, I'm terribly sorry. Not that lateness mattered with the Beatles too much. But I said, what happened was my young baby son at that time had cut his finger. And my wife had bound it up, as you do with kids, to make it sound more. And he was running around the house saying, bad finger, bad finger. I was telling Paul the story. Paul said, what a title. Paul immediately said, well, that's a great Bad Finger. That was a good group. That was a good group. Yeah, it was fantastic.
And you had a couple Taylors working there. Alistair Taylor, who's a good friend of ours here in Chicago. He's been to many fests. And Derek Taylor. And Derek is one of those interesting figures in Beatle history. And what was your impression of Derek and Alistair?
Well, Alistair was sort of left over from Brian's day, you know. In fact, with the Apple thing, he was really the office manager type guy, so I didn't have that much to do with oh wait, he was there all the time. Mm-hmm. But the other Taylor, Derek, there was something else. Now that was a man.
He's an interesting man.
He was fantastic. Now Derek and I got on remarkably well because he was a film buff. He knew every film I'd made. He knew you could discuss it with him. And we discussed this anthology at that time, you know, because he was into it. And I told him what I was doing, and he said, I thought it'd be great. I tried even to introduce Apple as a publishing company, to do their own publishing. And we talked about that. Well, Derek got the idea for doing the anthology out of that, you know, the book, which was great. Derek was a big, big favorite of mine, and a marvelous writer. Yeah, I like Derek.
And Brian Epstein, your dealings with Brian.
Well, Brian was always he was a good friend, Brian. Not great personal friend, but very good friend. I had terrific admiration for him. And we had one thing in common at that time. He loved bullfighting. Yes, yes. And I was having lunch with him one day, Brian. Incidentally, at that time, because of the phenomenon of the Beatles, they had a limited number of people that could speak with them on the telephone. If you telephoned and you weren't one on that list, there were 10, you couldn't talk with them ever. But I was on that list with Brian, which was great, you know. So now with Brian, he got ill. He got ill several times, as we know, and fatally in the end. And he called me from the hospital one day. I was at the studio out in Twickenham, and he said, that bullfighting book you told me about, which was an enormous volume in Spanish of the history of bullfighting, enormous thing. And he said, do you think I could borrow it? Well, I mean, I said, I would absolutely love you to borrow it and look at some of the beautiful artwork in it. But I said, if you put it on your chest, it'll crush you in hospital because it's so big. But he had it, and then he unfortunately died at that period. So I thought I lost the book, but then Peter Brown came up with it and said, I saw it in the house, I knew it was yours, and I brought it up. But yeah, Brian was well, you know, he was one of the reasons how I got John to play in How I Won the War, because I'd done we had been allowed a certain amount of money for that film, which was minimal, about £1 million at the time, and we were short, you know, with the budget and the expense of the film. So I said to Richard Lester, I think I'll go down and see Brian, see if we can get the extra money. So we did that. I went down to see him. Brian's immediately, we didn't use it, in fact, we didn't need it, but immediately offered the extra money. And at the time, I said, would you believe John playing a private in the army, gripweed, on this? He said, ask him, he's next door in the next office. Hey, John, you want to play it? Yes, I'll play it. That was it. I said, John, you know you've got to have your hair cut, you know, because that's the period. Yeah, it's okay, I'll play it. And he did. Interestingly, while we were making the film, he came to me and he said, Dennis, he said, I think I'm out of my depth here. I mean, John Lennon out of his depth. He said, with all these classic English actors around me, he said, I really feel out of my depth. I said, look, why don't you go to the director, explain the problem, and he will undoubtedly take care of it. About 2 years later, we were talking about the film. I said, did you ever, he said, yes, I took your advice. He said, I realized then that I was in control and Dick Lester was out of control. But that's John. I'm sure he didn't mean it. And when he left the film, he slipped me a book that he'd just written in his own right. And in the cover, just inside, I've still got it, it says, thank you, Donna and my wife, and Dennis, for making me smile and sending me home.
Oh, that's
Which
great.
Nice.
That's great.
I've still got it.
What was John like to work with? We've heard all kinds of different sides of him, and I think he's probably a pretty complicated guy. What was your dealings like with John Lennon?
It's a difficult question, Terry, you know, because I love them all, and I hate to say, you know, well, you see, you have to say that Paul was the easiest to work with, because Paul was a public relations man. He also had great talent for writing. He understood and wanted to make films. Paul was, I think, the easiest. John was always conducive. He would fall in love if it were a good idea. I mean, like the Tolkien books, Lord of the Rings. He loved that. He loved it. And again, when we finished Let It Be, the sad Let It Be, or Get Back, whichever you want to call it, I wanted to shoot the show. The idea was of the film just to do all those rehearsals as a build-up to one master show. And I wanted to shoot it in a Roman theater in the desert in Libya at that time, near Tripoli. And I put the idea to John, and he was absolutely mad for it, because I thought nobody in England knew what an Arab looked like. Iraq wasn't even heard of, you know. And John, I said we'd have an audience of Arabs, you know, enormous, in this lovely Roman theater. And he said it would be absolutely wonderful. He said it'd be wonderful for international relationships too, you know. But let me tell you now, George said, how do we get there? Ringo said, what do we eat? And Paul, of course, was with John. He was all for it. But as I said, unless the four of them made a decision, they didn't have a decision. So another idea went down. But they finished it on the roof. It was all right, wasn't it, really, on the roof? Yeah, I guess. It was great, really. Yeah.
Whose idea was that to take it up to the roof?
I think it was Paul's. I mean, it was the tattiest roof in London, if you really examine it. It was awful, you know, it was dirty and grubby. And when they said it to me, I thought, these guys are crazy. I mean, you couldn't see them for chimney pots, you know, old-fashioned English chimney pots. And the police, when they started down below, spent the rest of the afternoon trying to get them off, but we just played on, and it was quite an adventure. Yeah, I had to go back to the studio because I was in the middle of doing Magic Christian, and I got a call from Paul. He said, "Can you get a helicopter to do a high shot?" I said, "What sort of height? 15,000 feet?" He said, "Oh no, about 20 feet." Over London. It was crazy. They were crazy days, but wonderful, really. Wonderful.
Were you there when they were on the rooftop that day?
With what?
Were you on the rooftop that day?
Yeah, I was.
Can we spot you in the film?
Yeah, I was there. I mean, it was the most amazing thing about the Beatles was it doesn't matter where they were. You know, when they played, it was absolute magic. You know, it was absolute magic whenever they played.
Right.
It was really amazing. I mean, we were coming back from lunch one day, you know, I think we were in the Wigmore Street offices at the time, and Paul said, "Dennis, come and listen to these tracks." And he, you know, they had a couple of demo tracks, and I can't remember the other one for a song, but the second one was Hey Jude, you know, and I listened to it. I said, "Paul, this is absolutely wonderful." I said, "But don't ask me, you know, what goes out on singles." He said, "Well, they never put it out on a single." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's over 7 minutes long." And I said, "Well, you must," you know, I was new at Apple. I said, "Well, you cannot let them dictate to you what should go and what shouldn't go." So what they did, they put it out and they selected it. And I was lucky enough, fortunate enough to do the promo for it, the promotion thing for it. And they had several ideas for that, and that went on for days. I had an instruction from Paul, he left on my desk for some idiot process, all of which I ignored. I had the idea that for Hey Jude, I wanted it to be them playing together again for the first time in 2 years. So I set up rostrums at the studio. They came in, and I sent out. There was always 200 or 300 people outside Wigmore Street, outside the offices or Savile Row. And we put them in buses, brought them out for a show, and had a live show with the Beatles, first time in 2 years. Now, halfway through, the audience starts to get up on, the fans start to get up on the rostrum. Paul ran and said, "You know, this is really dangerous. Come here and have a look at it." So it took him in the recording booth, showed him the stuff. He said, "It's absolutely great, Dennis." Now, 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm having a glass of something with them up in the dressing room. They said, "Hey, Dennis, we really, really enjoyed doing this. This has been absolutely fabulous. Now we'll do a show." That was the start of Let It Be, or Get Back. That was the start of it. It was wonderful.
Now, in that promo film for Hey Jude, did they plan for the audience to come up on stage, or did that just happen? Or
Yeah, it was no rehearsal or anything, you know. I just put this whole rostrum thing 4 feet off the ground, and put their, you know, it got Mal and to put their instrument stuff up there, and they just came on and played. The idea was that we would be finished, and I had an assistant called Tony Bramwell who went around the streets picking up people. "Hey, would you like to go to a Beatles concert?" "You kidding?" On the bus.
Yeah, right.
Postman, you know, people off the streets. And off they came. And the idea was that we started in the afternoon, finished by about 4, 5, 6 o'clock. Goodbye. No way. It went on till 4 o'clock in the morning. It was absolutely amazing time. And I think it's wonderful, that promo.
Oh, it's a great performance.
Yes.
Absolutely great.
Yes.
Yeah. And really just seeing such a variety of types of people coming up and being around them. I think now we look at that, and that just sort of personifies what it was all about. You know, it was great.
You know, you mentioned Derek Taylor. Well, he ran an office there, which was more of a nurturing ground, really. I mean, every cabinet was full of booze and a lot of other stuff, I want to tell you, at the time. And it was an open house to anybody that wanted to come in. That's what the Beatles wanted.
Yeah.
That was fine until I think it was George invited
Hell's Angels, or
yeah.
right.
I mean, you would not believe the chaos there at that time. And these guys, and you know, when anybody came up to visit, they didn't stay for an hour. They stayed for 3 days.
Right.
You know, sleeping around the offices, and you were trying to run a company. But it was great, really. It was great, you know. It was really great, Terry. They were. You know, I was talking to Bob Freeman, looking at some of the. You know, Bob and I have known each other for years because he was around at the same time doing the photographs of the Beatles, and I was looking carefully at some of his pictures. You know, and that was the time when the Beatles were at their greatest. If you look, their eyes and their attitude was not destroyed by Manila. Do you remember the awful Manila thing and that? So it was great, really. They were great days.
Excuse me, we've had some people come in, and if you could please do that quietly, because those of us who are already in here are listening to a marvelous man share some stories, so please, out of respect, thank you. Oh, see how they respond? Aren't they wonderful? This is a terrific audience.
I think you're masterful. Hey, Terry, I could have done with you at Apple.
Thanks. I don't know how to done with the Hells Angels, though. I don't know if they respond to that gentle approach, but
you can imagine, can't you, in a private office, and suddenly about 12 Hells Angels in that gear with their motorcycles. I mean, you can imagine what happened. Oh, Christ. But Derek got over. He was the one that controlled it.
Your stories are just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about when Let It Be was sort of handed over to Phil Spector and how the Beatles felt about the change. And because I know originally the concept, of course, was that Paul wanted it to be the Beatles raw as it was back in the Cavern days, and then all of a sudden it turned into this Spector wall of sound, and obviously it got away from them. And can you give us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, the only time that I had a bit of business with Phil Spector was on the end of Let It Be. Now, what had happened about this? The Beatles were disintegrating as a group, even while we were shooting it, even before, really. And what happened was, I had them doing some of the preparation stuff at the studio, and George decided to leave. You know, I mean, he just walked away and said, "Hey, I'll see you around the halls." Paul came into my office, because I had an office right alongside the stage, and said, "Hey, Dennis, you know, it's come to an end. I said, "Hey, these things don't last. 3 days, and we'll be back. Let's forget it. Forget the work for 3 days. Now, let me tell you, you talk to George, I'll talk to John, and Ring, and we'll have them back in 3 days." That happened. Now, it went on and on and on, and it got worse. The atmosphere was bad while we were recording, so they decided to go back to Savile Row, and I stayed out at the studio. And Neil Aspinall, who now runs Apple, said to me, he wanted to be a film producer. He always wanted to be a film producer, which wasn't too easy, you know, in those days. And could he have the producer's credit on Let It Be? Because I produced it. I said, "Be my guest." So he got the credit for it. But then, you know, Klein brought in Phil Spector to do the music, which didn't please the Beatles at that time at all. And it was all over then. It was really all over, you know, as a group.
right. Yeah, you could see it in the film. It's kind of sad to watch it, you know. And
Yeah, well, if you look at that stuff and you look at how they were in the early days of Hard Day's Night, you can see the spirit had gone, really.
Right.
But they still came out with that fantastic album. I mean,
absolutely. And that concert on the rooftop is just
the
great.
phenomena of
Yeah.
the music has been incredible, isn't it?
Right. Well, we're looking forward to the release of that this fall, the unspectorized version, as Ringo calls it, with a more bare bones approach.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to that.
I look forward to seeing
Yeah,
it too.
that'd be great.
Yeah, there were some nice things in it, you know, but it was a sadness, really. But
And then they came back for Abbey Road. That's what I think is amazing.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely, absolutely. But you know, Terry, they weren't ever for mop tops. You know, they were for thinking guys. You know, they're educated. They had life. They all had their own idea, and they were never destined to live and die together. You know, but they did have this incredible thing of making fantastic music when they were together. But they were great. Great, really.
Now, we've often said, and even this weekend, we've talked about how we didn't, at the time, nobody thought the Beatles would last. They thought it was just a fad, you know, hurry up, make this movie and get it out before they fade away.
Well, yeah, that was.
But did you have any, you were in the middle of that, and
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely,
you never
absolutely.
thought 2003 I'm going to be in Chicago in the middle of the
Never,
United States
never.
talking,
Nothing was-
unbelievable.
I never, ever would I have thought that. But what happened with that was, one of the things, the ground rules for me making the picture were, Dennis, you have to do it quick, you have to do it cheap. You know that these pop groups don't last. I mean, now we finished the picture, and we finished it under budget. The whole film cost just under £180,000. The whole film, everything. So it took 2 days to get that back. So they had a film for nothing. But the interesting thing was, when we finished it, everybody was terribly nervous about showing it, you know, to the finance gentleman. So I was the guy that had to do it. The head of United Artists came over with his wife. They had all the top brass there, sat down, ran the film. Well, I think it's charming, but we have to dub their voices. Can you believe? That's absolutely true. I said, dub the Beatles' voices? Can you believe it?
It's insane.
But
Yeah,
that's an amazing thing about history, you know.
absolutely insane.
Amazing. But of course that didn't happen.
Thank God. Well, the other thing too is, for the younger folks here, you weren't around at the time, put it in some context, that rock musicians in films up to that point was ridiculous. I mean, movies that had rock artists performing in them. It was terrible. This movie was so different. And I remember the first time I went to see it, and of course we stayed for all 4 showings that day. But the first time I saw it, I was flabbergasted because I didn't expect anything that good. And I think even some of the established film critics that weren't rock stars or rock fans or Beatle fans, they were amazed at how good it was and how they came across.
Well, one of the reviews on it, I remember, said that this is the Citizen Kane of the pop movies.
Right,
Do you remember
right,
that?
right,
Which was incredible.
Right.
It was a fantastic. It just reflects on the talent of these guys, really.
Right.
Now, with the film, it was made in such a free fashion. For example, nothing was really a set piece in it. For example, the thing where they are dancing around in that field, it was an accident, really. What happened was I managed to con a friend of mine, British Airways, British European Airways, it was their BEA, to borrow their helicopter if I put B in front of it and TLAES and made it Beatles. So it wasn't British European Airways, it was Beatles Airways. And we didn't have the money or the time to get the necessary equipment to steady the camera, you know, when it was flying in a helicopter. So it juddered, you know. Now, Gil Taylor, who was the cameraman, went berserk, you know. But he thought. But the fact of the matter was that in doing it and finding that jerky movement, we just took that almost total disaster, added to it, and had the Beatles doing that dancing and changed the location 3 or 4 times. I think it became one of the most interesting pieces of the film.
Absolutely.
But that's the sort of thing that was happening.
Can you remember any of the other the headaches that you had in your capacity of problems that came up, problems that had to be solved in making
on the
that
film?
Yes.
Well, the biggest problem was fans. I mean, fans were the biggest problem. I mean, there were thousands every time we put a camera. Well, what happened was we tried it on we knew from the train sequence, which was the first sequence we filmed in the picture. And we knew the trouble we were in, because every day I changed. There was only myself and the head of the railway in England that knew where the Beatles were coming in at that night, because of the fans. I mean, there were 15,000 people everywhere. Yeah. But every night when they came in, whichever terminus it was, they were there. They found out. They were there. Crowd. So what I did was, I thought we'll shoot the exteriors as far as we can until it was impossible to put a camera down and impossible to film, and then rush back to the studio where I had some sets built to make it economic, you know, as a shoot. But then we shot in the location I found called the Old Scala Theatre. Up to that time, the only thing they'd performed there, I think, was Peter Pan. And then suddenly we got the Beatles there. And kids were climbing. They were doing some repairs to the roof. And you're talking about, God knows, you know, 500 feet up. And they'd left the ladders there. The kids were climbing the ladders and coming in the roof, you know. But one thing I remember about that, when they got the whole, we got the whole theatre filled up with youngsters to watch the Beatles perform. I lost Paul one day. We couldn't find him, and I found him up in the circle of this old theatre, surrounded with these kids talking to them. There was a wonderful memory of Paul, you know. And then, of course, there was that lovely day. I was looking through some of Carol's stuff, you know, in one of the rooms here, and there's a picture of Paul with his favorite horse, racehorse. I bought it for him. And what happened was, we were at the Scala Theatre, and I was standing talking to him on the stage, waiting for something or other. And Paul says, "It's me dad's birthday soon, and I don't know what to buy him." So I said, I don't know what, maybe, does he ever have a bet? And by the way, I used to breed racehorses as a hobby in those days. I said, "Does he ever have a bet on a horse?" He said, "Yeah, he sometimes has a shilling each way." So I said, "Buy him a racehorse." "Oh, where'd you get them?" "How much are they?" So I bought it for him, and it was called Drake's Drum. Needless to say, it won several races immediately. And the last time I saw Paul and Linda together, he said to me, he said, "Dennis, we still got the horse." And I thought that was wonderful, the way they nurtured that old horse. But he loved it.
That's great.
Yeah, it was great.
I remember the story, too, of Paul gave his father the photograph of the horse, and his father said, "That's lovely, but why are you giving me a picture of a horse?" He goes, "No, Dad, it's the horse."
Well, I'd forgotten that, but you're so right, Sherry. Now, what happened was, it was at the premiere, and his father's birthday coincided with after midnight, that thing. But when we got the horse, which was a very indifferent racehorse, I mean, £1,000 bought nothing in the racehorse business in those days, and I thought, well, he can learn on it, you know, it'll be fun. Now, Paul then embarrassed the hell out of me by saying, "Can we get it painted?" I said, "What?" Not the horse, a picture. So I said, so I found this photographer, and it was very snobbish in those days, racing. I found this photographer artist who agreed to do it if we didn't show the breeding of the horse. So we did this, and I gave it to Paul. He gave it to his father. No. So now we dissolve out. We're running at the premiere of Hard Day's Night. I am talking with Princess Margaret and her husband, who was a photographer and you wanted to hear all about how Gil Taylor had gotten certain aspects of the film. And Paul comes running up. He said, Dennis, it's the picture. We're going to give it to Dad. Jim, his name was. Going to give it to Jim. So I go over. He takes a brown paper off the picture, hands the picture to Jim, his father. Jim looks at it, says, "Drake's Drum. Oh, it's very nice, Paul." All the Beatles were there. "Very nice, Paul." I said, "Paul, did you tell him you got the horse?" "Oh, no," he said, "we got the horse, Dad." It was really weird. Yeah.
Well, in A Hard Day's Night, I think it was interesting, too. It showed the appeal of the Beatles. They weren't just four guys together. They each had a very individual personality. And I know in the film they tried to portray each personality and how it was different. And sometimes in a film like that, you tend to generalize or stereotype. But you knew them. How close were they to those personas that we saw in that film?
I think completely, Terry. You see, we didn't ask them, really, to extend any acting ability. We only photographed them really as they were. For example, the scene that George did with Kenneth Haig, which I personally think is the best scene in the picture. You know, it was a wonderful scene. Really, it's my favorite. And it was George came out when they said, what do you think about this shirt or something I offered him? And he says, it's grotty. That word's in the dictionary now in England for awful. Yeah. So, but then you see, and then there was always Ringo, who was always humorous in the film, and he was humorous as we went along making it. George always played rather cool. I think John was trying to act, but it didn't matter with him, you know. But it was good. It was really good. But yeah, they were capable of doing most things, you know, with on film.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, last question. When the Beatles, you were responsible for the promotional films. What was your take on when they decided to go the psychedelic route? When when we saw in the Hollywood Palace or whatever the black and white version of, Strawberry Fields and stuff like that, and Penny Lane, which was such a departure for the standard issue performance video that they'd done before in the past and stuff. About as exotic as they got was the paperback writer out in the garden or whatever and stuff. So it was like, what did you think of, and what did the guys at Apple and everything think when they're jumping off of harpsichords and backwards and painting, tipping tables over of all kinds of stuff?
Well, it's an interesting question. You've got to bear in mind that it was the period. It was the period that dictated psychedelia. I mean, I was doing a film called Petulia in San Francisco at the middle of Haight-Ashbury. So it was really the period that did it. But the interesting thing was about that, when doing promos, one was very limited. For example, the first promos that were done of the Beatles stuff, I mean, Joe McGrath shot 10 of them in one day. Now it takes 10 days to shoot one promo, after some of the groups had gotten a hold of the idea. But generally, that came out of the limitations of doing promos. Because up to that time, all we had to do was to use a split lens on a camera, which fragmented everything. And one was really very limited. And it wasn't until they developed, the idea of the promo and doing that. My own view on doing Hey Jude was to go right back to simplicity, because I think it had gone too far. I mean, is really what you're saying. And I think it had gone too far. So I went right back to simplicity, and it worked magnificently, I think, the Hey Jude clip.
Well, Dennis, one of the joys of working here at this fest is getting to meet people like yourself, not only because of your role in the Beatles story, but because you're a wonderful man in your own right, and we're really pleased to have you here this weekend, and look forward to another session tomorrow and getting your autograph and all that. Thank you, Dennis O'Dell. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. It's been lovely.